thank you to everyone out there today. Thank you guys for being part of this. Thank you to our guests, to our moderator, and obviously to Alan for hosting this. This is a very important topic. Every topic that we discuss here is going to be very important. But what I'll do, I'll start off with discussing Alan Ellison. Alan Ellison is the 2022 U.S. Senate Democratic candidate representing Florida. Mr. Ellison also is a Florida native, a small business owner, and a political scientist. Alan also has a nonprofit NGO dedicated to positively changing and strengthening the lives of families and communities in the state of Florida. Alan is also committed to ensuring all Floridians are heard, and his vision is centered around improving the lives and the quality of life for all citizens. This means protecting Social Security, health care, the rights of women, veterans care, increasing disability benefits, and making improvements to infrastructure and our educational system. Along with Alan today, we have our moderator, Ms. Tanisha Owen. She currently has and serves as the Housing and Gender Justice Project Coordinator for the Family Violence Law Center. She's a passionate advocate on issues on Black economic empowerment, diversity and inclusion, criminal justice reform, commercial sexual exploitation of youth, and education equity. Tanisha is originally from Oakland, California, and has served the public at nonprofit organizations and government agencies in the Bay Area. She returned to Oakland after a career as a diplomat, proudly serving the U.S. in the sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East and South America. When she is not raising her daughter or working to repair systems, Tanisha finds time to publish her poetry, write fiction stories, and nonfiction articles. She graduated from Spelman College in political science and economics, holds a joint master's degree from Princeton University in public policy and urban and regional planning. And she also obtained her Juris Doctor from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. And then joining Alan as well as a panelist and a guest is Dr. Sidney Banier, who's the 2022 Democratic candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, Florida District 19, and the 2020 Democratic nominee. She is a mom of three, a native Floridian, a small business owner, and a university instructor. Dr. Banier has been a decorated professional in the field of community development for almost 20 years, collaborating with nonprofits around the world on issues such as homelessness, children's services, education, and sustainable development. She is running for Congress to be the servant that Southwest Florida deserves, fighting for our water, our health, and our community. Dr. Banier believes together we can create a Southwest Florida where the sun shines on everyone. So thank you again to everyone that's in attendance today. We have a very strong cast, and we're excited what we're about to discuss, which is voter suppression.
Thank you for that, Corey. Those bios are just amazing. And so I'd first like to talk to these two public servants and candidates for Congress about the filibuster. We know that Democrats are now a majority, and I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? First, I'd like to hear from Mr. Ellison and then Dr. Banier. What are your thoughts on the filibuster? Should we remove it, change it? What kind of strategy do you think could occur there with the filibuster?
Well, first of all, thank you for moderating this town hall. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard so many wonderful things about you. As far as the filibuster is concerned, I personally believe that we should get rid of the filibuster, especially since we have had so much time wasted in our government, so much time wasted in our Congress. We need to get back to the business of the people, and a filibuster only serves as a component to hold up progress. I'm a progressive, so I believe that we should be moving forward on some of the most pressing issues of our time. And oftentimes, we're not able to move forward because of the filibuster.
And what are your thoughts, Dr. Banier?
Let me make sure I'm on. There we go. Thank you so much for having me here today. And speaking of bios, Ms. Owens, yours is fantastic. There's a special place in my heart for people who've served in diplomacy, because my background is in international development as well. So thank you so much for leading us here today. And I do agree with Alan in this respect. One of the things that's so disappointing about where we are right now in our Congress, particularly the Senate, is the fact that procedural items have been used to weaponize and politicize things that really should be nothing more than how we do business. Mitch McConnell was the one that decided that he was going to use the filibuster, the threat of the filibuster, on a cloture vote every single time something came across his desk that he didn't like, that didn't suit his needs. Rather than just letting it go procedurally to an up or down vote, which is how the Senate is supposed to work, he decided that every single time he was going to use the filibuster. And so we're in a very unfortunate circumstance where in the past, the filibuster had been used only in extreme circumstances. There is a dark side to it. It had been used to hold civil rights legislation through the 60s as well. But it used to be something where the very few times it was used, somebody was taking a stand. It has been weaponized. It is not appropriate. It is actually disgusting. I bet everyday Americans, if you realize that there was a very, very small rule that Mitch McConnell was using to essentially keep a stranglehold on progress in our Congress, I think they'd be appalled. So I'm really glad that we're talking about this here today.
Thank you both for educating us a little bit more about the filibuster and the problematic nature of that small rule. So we'd like to ask another question about voting day. And right now we see that Republicans are unwilling to have voting day as a national holiday. And so I'd like you both to comment on that. Do you think that that actually discriminates against the working class in America? So first, we'd like to hear from Mr. Ellison and then Dr. Banyai. Please talk to us a little bit about Republicans and their refusal to have voting day as a holiday.
Yeah, I think it's a situation where we have to look at how policies, including voting policies, affect our society and how we can progress our society. So I believe that every American should be able to at least have a day off to go and vote. And the thing is that in some states like Florida, where there are literally almost 100,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans, but the Republicans control the legislative body and the executive branch, they simply don't want people to be getting off to be able to vote, because they know that if we gave equal opportunity for people to vote, Democrats would win hands down. And so they want to use these types of tactics so that we can not have the proper representation that we deserve. And so I believe that it should be a national holiday. And I would take it a step further. I think that it should be a paid national holiday. This would only help workers in not only Florida, but throughout the United States. I think more people would be excited about doing this. I believe they have this in Puerto Rico, where literally it's like 90% of the voters actually get out and vote. I would love to see something like that here in Florida. I would love to see something like that in the United States, because the way that it currently is, 70% of voters simply are not voting, some of the times because they're having to work. And so I think that we should support our workers, give them a day off, a paid day off holiday, and let's make it work.
And Dr. Banyai, what are your thoughts about having a national holiday, voting day be a national holiday, and about the Republicans refusing to expand this right in some form?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right that it does disproportionately affect working people when on election day they can't get off. And we already know that the Republican strategy is voter suppression. They got in front of the Supreme Court and argued it, saying that the more access to the ballot there was, the higher the advantage the Democrats had. So they know they can't win if the playing field is equal. They know they can't win hearts and minds of the everyday people. So they have to find ways to make sure that only the people that they want to vote can vote. And that disproportionately affects communities of color. It affects the working class. It affects moms. It affects people who are homebound and seniors, people who have health issues, who cannot stand in line, sometimes for hours and hours, to exercise their constitutionally protected right to vote. It's disgusting. And I am completely appalled, yet again, here, just in the second question we've had here, at how the Republicans bold-faced will tell us that they are enacting voter suppression to win.
And I'd like to follow that up with just a question about the Supreme Court. Now, we know that the Supreme Court is leaning a little more heavily conservative now. If there were legislation and it had to, that sort of decision came to the Supreme Court, are we confident that the Supreme Court would rule in favor of the public? Dr. Banyai, since you brought the sort of that question in, I'd like to hear from you first and then Mr. Ellison.
You know, we need to be able to trust the Supreme Court. It was one of the scariest things when we were looking at how the Republicans were trying to pack activist conservative judges onto the Supreme Court. Because one of the fundamental components of our democracy is the belief that there will be justice. And if one side is partisanly favored, especially in the Supreme Court, and up and down, frankly, the federal court system, we have issues, growing issues of trust. It can really destabilize our democracy. So that being said, I am hopeful that the current sitting Supreme Court justices will act in the best interest of our democracy and the people and this country and put their partisan politics aside.
And what are your thoughts, Mr. Ellison, on the Supreme Court and their ability to look at voting rights a little more expansively?
You know, with the courts being stacked the way that they are, I'm not so confident as I was at one time. To echo what Dr. Banyai was just talking about, I believe, you know, a constitution and a government is only as strong as the people that believe in it. And right now, the people simply don't have the faith in our members of the executive branch, the legislative branch, or the judiciary. So I think that we should really focus on bills like HR. We should focus on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Bill and make it a national policy that gives people the undeniable right to vote. The fact of the matter is a right to vote. We know that leaders like Dr. King, who fought, bled, and died for people's right to vote, exist. But in the state of Florida, our governor feels that voting is a privilege. And he's so privileged to be able to make a statement like that. We need to make it clear and across the board throughout the country that voting is a right and that it should not be infringed upon by any legislators, especially those who are only working towards disenfranchising people of color, women, all of the people that Dr. Banyai talked about earlier. Because we have to continue moving, start with these pro policies, and it take us back to, you know, the 60s. And, you know, we're not doing what we're supposed to be as a society, and that is to continue to evolve and keep up with the times. You know, it is so unfortunate and so disheartening to know that there are so many Floridians and so many Americans that have been disenfranchised, like the returning citizens here in Florida. We know that there are 1.4 million of them that are being disenfranchised right now. And we need to stand firm because anytime that any one of us is disenfranchised on our basic rights, then it creates a slippery slope for anyone to be disenfranchised. And we have to stand up. Equality for everyone. It's the only way. It has to move from being just an idea. It has to become a reality.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the returning citizens, the 1.4 million returning citizens in Florida. And for those who aren't in the know, those are people who are returning to the community from incarceration. What do you think about how DeSantis signed Senate Bill 7066 that prevents returning citizens from voting unless they pay off their fines first? So please, we'd like to hear from Mr. Ellison first, and then Dr. Banier on returning citizens and Senate Bill 7066, which requires them to pay off all fines before they're able to access the vote.
You know, I have a very strong opinion on that. I feel that it is a Jim Crow style era tactic to keep people of color from being able to vote. I think it's a tactic to keep Democrats from being able to vote, because out of the 1.4 million returning citizens, 80% of those are Democratic votes. And so a million, that represents about 1 million votes. So 1 million votes could easily change the tide of who is in office. And I believe it's one of the reasons why they are targeting people who are returning back into society. It also sends a very negative message, and that is, you know, we have a idea in this country about second chances. We have an idea in this country about strengthening families. But if you look at this piece of legislation, it actually does the opposite. It hurts returning citizens' ability to return back to society and be able to feel as if they are actually a part of this society. Everyone should have the right to be able to express their most basic right, which is the right to choose who they want to represent their interests. And to take that away from them, it's very disheartening, because I know that a lot of Floridians that don't vote, who would like to vote, feel as if their government is simply not working for them. And it is very difficult to try and inspire people to affect positive change when they themselves have no voice. They themselves, their votes literally do not count, because we have legislators, and I call them Jim Crow Republicans, that are in office constantly trying to take away their basic right to vote and have better representation for themselves. And it's not helping the families either, because if these people that are returning, that are brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, don't have the right to vote, as well as some of the other policies, like, for example, Senator Jeff Brandes is actually pushing for a bill that doesn't allow these same people to be able to partake in the $15 minimum wage increase. What kind of message are we sending? These people want to turn their lives around, but we're taking every single advantage away from them from being able to do just that. And I think that as a state, we should look at these leaders, and we should take into account that they are hurting progress, and they do not deserve to be in their respective offices.
And what are your thoughts, Dr. Banier?
Yeah, absolutely. Alan and I are in alignment on this issue for sure. This is a poll tax. And it's a really sick and twisted world when actually the representative here in Florida 19 is somebody who had felonies, on his record and had enough means to get them wiped off his record and then not only get his vote back, but be able to run for public office. And the cruel irony of it all is he was one of the Republican legislators that voted for the poll tax on other returning citizens. And now, in another step in this twisted GOP game, he is now on the national level in the U.S. House of Representatives, continuing to talk the facade of criminal justice reform and the facade around returning citizens, telling us that even in the state of Florida, that the majority of the people who were able to actually get their rights returned were white people. And that has a heck of a lot to do with the poll tax that he voted for. So, and he's using that, by the way, to discredit these wildly popular initiatives like in Florida, like it was voted on, with a high level of popularity across the state, only to have the state legislature come back and curtail the will of the people. So we're in a very strange circumstance right now where we are having people who are regular folks who've paid their debt to society are getting ready to come back and should have every capability to be able to vote. And yet we have a tax put on them that, by the way, this government in the state of Florida has not even tracked well. There are people who try to go and get their dollar amount and it can't even be found. And so this is a really flawed system. It was nothing more than a political ploy, like Alan said, to make sure that those folks who are likely to vote Democrat were not going to vote. They played the race card on it as well. They knew that folks who are people of color were going to be disproportionately affected. And now they're turning that back on its head and saying that's why they shouldn't have had this kind of rights restoration in the first place, is because it was discriminatory. And so it's really just off the charts insane what's going on here in the state of Florida when it comes to returning citizens. And I feel very impassioned around this because I believe that our democracy deserves to have the participation of all voices, and that includes our returning citizens.
I absolutely agree. And it's one of the reasons why I'm running for the United States Senate, to be that one extra vote in the United States government to be able to protect those rights. I believe that whenever we have a federal piece of legislation that can supersede the states, I think that's probably going to be the only way that we can win on this issue, because as it currently exists, it's in the courts right now. And the last courts voted in favor of the Republicans by making sure that our returning citizens do have to pay these poll tax before they can vote. And as Cindy was saying earlier, I know that there are people that have tried to figure out where to pay these taxes, or if there was even any taxes to begin with, and they don't even know where to find out. They don't even know if they owe anything. And then there was this other scare tactic, and this was a piece of legislation that went forward, that if they tried to register to vote, knowing that they were returning citizens and knowing that there was a possibility that they owed some fines, that they could be put back in jail. And so I know that there are people that did not even register to vote because of the threat of them going back to jail for simply trying to exercise their right to vote. And again, Governor DeSantis has already said that voting is not a right in Florida. It is a privilege. And we need to remove that language from his lips with federal legislation to make it mandatory and legal across the country, that every American should be able to have the right to vote. Just like some of our neighboring countries like Canada, where literally everyone can go in and vote with a driver's license. There shouldn't be all of these barriers. We also know that in 43 states, there have been at least 250 bills that have been introduced by Republicans to create further voting barriers. And these voter suppression tactics they come up with them all the time. They actually came up with even more at the last CPAC conference. So we have to work twice as hard as the Republicans at protecting individual rights to vote. Because if we don't, we're going to continue to see in states like Florida, where there's a majority Democratic populace with a majority Republican representation, and it's just not working.
Well, if I may ask a follow-up question, and I'd like to hear from you, Dr. Banyai, in terms of the Voting Rights Act and the Supreme Court's elimination of protections in those places that have a history of voter suppression. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do we have the possibility of returning to that level of protection that was necessary in the 50s and 60s that really appears to be necessary now as well? Do you have any thought?
Well, I mean, that's why we see this 253 pieces of legislation across the country, Republicans running to their state legislature to throw up these barriers to access. It's absolutely as a result of the rollback of that provision of the Voting Rights Act, where there was oversight before any changes in places that had historically used poll taxes and other barriers to access to disproportionately affect African Americans. And the thing that's so perverse about it is it's just happening again without any sort of oversight now. They're very upfront about it. They're very clear as to what the intentions are. And I really hope that we can have the HR 1 passed, because a lot of those protections will come back in order for us, including provisions for returning citizens. So I'm looking forward to that.
Sorry, and I am muted. And since we're on this sort of train, I'd like to ask about gerrymandering. So we know what gerrymandering. Can we get a little bit of an explanation of gerrymandering and how cities and counties are not drawing district lines fairly? And what can be done in Florida to fix this? So let's hear from Mr. Ellison first, and then Dr. Banyai on gerrymandering.
Okay, so I wasn't prepared to give a definition, but I'll take a stab at it. I believe the term was derived back in 1812 by a legislator. I think his last name was Jerry. And he came up with this concept to be able to benefit himself by redrawing the district maps to put more of his followers, his voters inside of his district. And so the concept is where legislators, whoever controlled the body of the legislature, and we'll just talk about Florida, for example, the Republicans controlled the state legislature. So every 10 years after the census, the country undergoes what is known as a redistricting process, and it's also known as gerrymandering. And whoever controls the legislative body, the state legislative body, they get to draw the maps to benefit those in their party. And so in Florida, because we are controlled by the Republicans will be redrawing the map to benefit those in their party next year. And the thing is that the way we are able to try and get around this is to have federal legislation that creates a commission, a bipartisan commission that would allow the maps to be redrawn that would equally give everyone access to representation, and it shouldn't be where it's one-sided. So I know in Florida, where Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy's district is, her district is going to get divided up because of population size. And so the Republicans are going to do their best to make sure that they can make it more Republican leaning, which is one of the reasons why she is probably looking to run for a different office, because it's going to be a little bit more difficult for her to win in her district. And this happens all around the country. And it's been going on since 1812. And it has to happen for the sake of keeping everything equal and balanced, but it's the way that it happens that make it unfair. And the only way to get around it is to have a bipartisan, independent commission to do this, and not legislators that are currently in office. And so that's my stab at it.
And Dr. Vanier?
Yeah, that's right. And so I want to just pick up on a couple points here. So we have a state constitutional amendment in Florida that says that we have to have our districts drawn on natural lines. You can't get these funny looking districts. If you've ever seen, I believe Jim Jordan's district is like up over here and it looks like a crab with arms coming around like this. That's gerrymandering, where they draw to, fit a need. Now, what's really interesting in the state of Florida is that although it's illegal to particularly draw a district to discriminate against a group of people based on race, you can use race as a proxy for party. It's absolutely fine to draw a district that has, or to split up Black communities and put them in different districts because there's an assumption that the Black community is going to vote Democrat. That's great, but you can't say that you're splitting it just because they're Black and you want to make it hard for Black people to vote, right? But it's absolutely okay to use that as a proxy for making it hard for Democrats to get elected, which is a fascinating legal construct that really is homegrown here in Florida. But what I think is interesting is that even though right now we have really gerrymandered districts in the state of Florida, this was post that amendment, and we had actually both the League of Women Voters and the NAACP had reviewed those districts based on some of these principles. It was actually a suit by the NAACP that claimed this discrimination, that came up with this crazy rationale for splitting up communities or for, drawing lines around them. But what's happened here also in the state of Florida is a bit of trading. So we have districts that are, they cut out the Democratic districts and they say, hey, these are your guys' district. And then the Republicans cut out their districts and they're like, these are ours. And so you have districts like mine that are very heavily Republican, and they're drawn that way specifically because essentially there was some, let's call it a backroom deal in Tallahassee around how they split up the state. Now, what Alan's talking about is actually part of H.R. 1, where they are going to have some oversight at the federal level about how these congressional districts are redistricted, and they're looking at making sure that they are scientifically and statistically significant in terms of their proportions and how they're drawn. So it can't be just based on, hey, we made a deal and the Republicans get this side and the Democrats get this side anymore, like we have here in Florida. It's got to be based on, we did our best to follow these natural lines to keep communities who are contiguous together, and that there are not really highly partisan angles in the way that they're drawing this district. So this is just another reason why I am very excited for the next passage of that H.R. 1 bill, and why I think it's really important for the American people to have a fair shot and be able to choose the best representative for their district, not just what some backroom deal in their state capital agreed to.
Thank you both for that. And as a student of political science, I am fascinated. And so I was all geeked out to hear all of this. And I apologize to anyone else who may not have been as interested as I was about all of this history, political science history in Florida. But that was great. And I think it lets us know where we're headed and some of those tools and tactics that have been used in the past that are continuing to be used that harm the voting public. And so we have another question here about statehood for DC. What are your thoughts, and why would that question come up in Florida? But we do have, since you are both looking at national elections, statehood for DC, what could that mean? How would that change things? Why is that important to us?
I think it's something that is necessary because DC gets taxed like states, but they don't get the representative vote that other states get. So if you've ever been to DC, you know that there's a license plate that's dominant for most license plates, and that is taxation without representation. When I first went to DC, it was in 2008, and I saw that, and I was wondering what was that about. So I asked someone, and they said it's because we have to pay all of these taxes, but we don't get any benefits and we don't get any votes. And so, this is the nation's capital. Our government is housed there in between Virginia and Maryland. And there are over 650,000 people that live there. And on any given day, there's about 2 million people that come into the city to be able to work in the federal government, which is the world's largest employer. So I believe that DC should gain statehood. And what that would do for Democrats in particular, it would give them more voting power in the United States Congress and the United States Senate. And so right now we need all of the strength and numbers that we can gain, because we have so many pieces of legislation that need to go forward. And right now, with members of the Republican Party that are simply there to obstruct progress, we have to make sure that DC becomes a state, because not only will it benefit them and all of those people that live and work there, but it would also help us out on the Democratic side. So I wanted to be transparent about that. And if Puerto Rico is interested in becoming a state, I think we should make that happen as well.
Oh, yeah. So that's actually the big rub. Exactly what Alan's talking about right now is that as much as it's the right thing to do, because absolutely they are being taxed without representation, which is against our Constitution. And but Mitch McConnell's going to pull out that filibuster to make sure that we need a supermajority to be able to get this onto the voting floor in the Senate, because he knows that it means that it'll be one more congressional representative that's going to go Democratic and 2 senators. And what's really interesting about this is I believe the comparison is there's more people in DC than I think both Wyoming and Rhode Island. So population-wise, we're talking about a significant portion of Americans who are not represented appropriately in our Congress. So I think it's really important. I think it's the right thing to do. I don't really think that there's anybody within the jurisdiction of the United States that should be without representation, and that includes Puerto Rico and Guam, among other places as well. Contrary to what MTG believes, that is actually a U.S. territory and not a foreign country where we send aid to. But I think that these countries, especially places like Puerto Rico that has voted popularly that they're indicating that they wanted to become a state, should be formally brought into the union. It's the right thing to do. We know now, though, that this was probably a lot more likely prior to Donald Trump's major debacles in Puerto Rico around Hurricane Maria, where there was a significant shift in partisan views there against the Republicans. So people were thinking that it would be possible to have DC and Puerto Rico because it would balance out. That's kind of the only way that you were going to get the Senate and the congressional representatives to vote for something like this. But now it seems like it's going to probably get marred down in partisan politics. And that's a shame for these Americans.
Wow. So as we are getting shorter on time, I want to make sure that we get to briefly hear from both of you about the kinds of policies you'd like to see enacted should you be elected that would protect voters' rights. So, Mr. Ellison, what kinds of policies would you push or want enacted to secure voting rights if you were in the Senate?
If I was in the Senate, I would be definitely pushing for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Bill, definitely be pushing for H.R. 1. Also, I would definitely want to see there be ballot boxes in every single precinct in the state of Florida, as well as around the country. We know that Republicans are constantly trying to reduce the amount of ballot boxes. I know in Texas, there are literally like one ballot box per 3 miles in some places. And sometimes it takes 3 hours to get to the ballot box. And if you have to drive such a great distance, it's going to create barriers to being able to vote. And so these types of barriers should not be in place. We should make it as easy as possible to be able to do something as simple as voting. Again, people have fought for it, they have marched for it, they have died for it. And I believe that in order for us to honor the legacy of those individuals, we have to make it a national policy across the board that everyone have the right to vote, and that no one that is in office, and this is something that I would also push as a legislative piece of bill, and that is if people get caught trying to infringe upon those rights, then they should be expelled from their office. It is un-American, and it's one of the things that I've been saying a lot on Twitter, and that is every time policies like that begin to infringe upon those rights, then we have to call it for what it is. It is un-American, and it's so unfortunate that we have so much of that here in the state of Florida. I think they believe it's the only way they can win.
Dr. Banyai?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe everything that Alan said, and I've talked quite a bit about HR1, so I'm a big fan of that, and the John Lewis Act as well. One thing that we didn't talk about a lot that's part of HR1 that I think we need a lot more of is actually campaign finance reform. We need to have more grassroots candidates. We need to have more people who are regular people that have access to the ballot, that we can actually get on the ballot. You know, Florida has one of the highest bars of entry for congressional representatives. It's the highest dollar amount in the country, except for, I think, Republicans in Kansas, and that might be a Bill Clinton legacy. But we have to think seriously about what that means. So we've made it so that only the very, very wealthy can have a true shot at things a lot of times. Candidates like me and like Alan, who are, family people and running our own business, it becomes an incredible burden on us to try to be able to serve our people. And yet we try, but, we don't have millions of dollars of our own cash that we're just throwing into an election. And that's a big problem, as well as the dark money. So when you have dark money, PACs coming in and running, slanderous ads against your competitor, that gives you a leg up. So we really need to reform that. That's part of the Citizens United decision that opened the floodgates on this. And we just need some regulations around it, because right now it's a black hole. And so anybody can throw in dollars to derail any contest anywhere in the country. And it really needs to stop. So that's one thing that I think is really important for us to recognize as part of the voter suppression. And the other thing I want to mention, because we haven't mentioned it here, is that although we have issues like these legislative bills that are coming up that are going to make it harder for regular people to vote, let's look at some of the other shenanigans around elections that are being pulled. We have a former state senator here in Florida that put up a shill candidate to get a Republican elected. They got somebody with the same last name. So to take votes away from the Democratic candidate. And what's it's wild. It reads like a Carl Hiaasen book, okay? But it's true, and it's unfolding right in front of us. And that's another type of election interference. So when you hear Republicans talk, they're squawking about fraud, we got to turn that right back on them and say, what have you been doing? All of the lies and the manipulation, when everybody over here on the Democratic side, we're just trying to get people able to vote. We're just trying to get regular people on the ballot. And that's the truth of what's going on here in America. So, I'm going to keep telling that story because I think it's important. And I'm going to keep fighting for access to the ballot and access for grassroots candidates through campaign finance reform.
Yeah, I want to, Dr. Owens, I want to echo on what Dr. Banye is talking about. When she talks about ballot access, that means, for a lot of you that are watching this, that means in order for you to run for federal office in the United States and in Florida in particular, part of being able to be on the ballot is to pay a $10,400 ballot fee. This isn't something that you see in other states. And so I believe that if you don't know where I come from, if you don't understand my set of circumstances, then how are you going to represent my interests? And a lot of times these wealthy individuals, they end up becoming your representative simply because they have the financial wherewithal to pay those ballot fees to get on the ballot and ultimately become the elected official. Whereas individuals who understand you, they understand where you come from, they spend a great deal of time working and advocating on behalf of the issues that you care about. Oftentimes, these individuals don't have $10,400 to pay a ballot fee in order to get on the ballot. And so that's why you'll always see candidates at the federal level. They will always look a certain way because they won't always look like me, because most people of color don't have the same financial resources as our white counterparts. And so I think right now I may be the only African-American male running for this seat in the state of Florida. Out of 20 plus million people, only one individual. And it's because I am not going to allow any financial barrier that was created by legislators to stop me from being the representative that the people so desperately need. And, I just wanted to say that because oftentimes the term ballot access gets lost on people who are not really in tune into the political process. And it's something that I didn't learn when I was going to college for political science. I didn't learn this until I actually got into the race to run, only to find out, wow, it's this much, So when we talk about campaign finance reform, we definitely need to get rid of this, because here's the thing. The Constitution says that if you're going to run for federal office, then you have to be of a certain age, you have to be a United States citizen, and you have to live in that state by the time you are elected to that office. That's what the Constitution, and that is what governs federal candidates. So for the state of Florida to institute a dollar amount to say you have to pay this dollar amount before you can actually run, I believe it's unconstitutional, because you won't find any of that in the federal Constitution. And so I agree, we have to continue echoing this, and we have to definitely push to get that piece of policy into the H.R. 1 bill or some other advanced bill to get rid of these ridiculous fees that are forcing so many people of color, women, marginalized individuals from actually being able to run at the federal level. I know so many people that dropped out of their congressional race because they were not able to raise that kind of money just to pay the ballot fee.
Thank you so much for that. This has been fascinating, and I know we're coming close to time, and we have just two more questions, but one of them, since we're talking about campaign finance reform, what are your thoughts on some of the corporations who are now saying they won't support anything that makes it hard to vote, even though they gave money to Republicans before now? And as you've indicated, a lot of Republican tactics are based in voter suppression. So what are your thoughts on those corporations and how we can add in some campaign finance reform there?
Well, first of all, corporations shouldn't have any input whatsoever into campaign issues, because corporations can't vote. But for the fact that they actually do try to influence these legislators and their decisions and policy, I would say that pay your employees a wage that is comparable to where we are in the society, $15 minimum wage, and also give them some time, some paid time off to actually go and vote. Because if they're talking about what they're talking about and not doing what's necessary, then it's just lip service. And I think we have too much of that going on.
Yeah. I was gonna say, yeah, here to all of that Alan said, and I agree. We shouldn't have these corporate interests in our politics, and it's appalling. You know, my congressional opponent in 2020, he had over $500,000 in corporate PAC dollars directly. That's not even the dark money. That's just the legit stuff on the front end. And what was really interesting is that a lot of these corporations, you know, post the January 6th attacks, pulled back and said, oh, well, we're not going to support Republicans, you know, that supported this. And it's interesting, oh, they're not going to support people who are against, you know, or in favor of voter suppression. This to me is all just bullcrap, frankly. Like, this is not something that I think anybody should really take serious. I think if you have, you know, people taking dollar donations from these corporations, you should be highly suspect of what they are getting in return for that. And I don't think you should believe these corporations who are putting out these messages, trying to be en vogue at the moment of whatever political issue is hot, because they don't want the PR backlash. I don't think you should believe that either, you know. But do the follow-up on where they're putting their money. So if they're telling you and that you're feeling good because that's a brand you like, and you know, you think that they're going to vote, you know, be for improving voter access, and then they're turning around, they're supporting candidates who are not, I think that falls back on us as consumers to call them back out on it and be like, no, but you're not. And then continue to call for campaign finance reform, because this is ridiculous. And by the way, we should be very upset both Democrats and Republicans take this kind of big dollars to only go to Washington, D.C. and do their bidding.
Yeah, I agree. The other factor is when you're a legislator, you have the responsibility of providing governance and oversight for a lot of these organizations. And if you're taking their funds, then you're probably not going to do your job. So, for example, Greg Stubbe, he takes a lot of money from Big Sugar. He takes a lot of money from companies like Mosaic, which is one of the largest companies in Florida. But these companies are big polluters. And so how can you hold big polluters accountable whenever you're taking their money? And it's evident because they continue to pollute our environment, and these legislators they simply do nothing when it comes to trying to write policy to hold them accountable. And so we have to look at the conflicts of interest that exist. That's why we have to have campaign finance reform. That's why we have to get big money out of politics.
And our last question is about voter ID. Like, strict voter ID laws seem to be discussed even more lately. What can people do in their own communities to stop these type of suppression tactics from happening?
Cindy, would you like to answer?
You know, I think the easiest answer is elect Democrats, because it's we're the ones that want to give more people access to the ballots. We're the ones that are going to go to your supervisors of elections, your board of county commissioners, your city council, your state legislature, and our federal government, and who are going to make policy that is going to help people and make sure that we're getting the most access to voting that we can. You know, I have a background in homeless services, helping people who are experiencing homelessness. And this is where these kind of voter ID things really just kind of hit home for me for populations like that. We know that people who are not, computer savvy have issues with this. People who have transportation issues have hard time getting IDs. People who do not have permanent housing, have mental health or substance abuse issues. All of these folks are Americans, and they should be able to vote without being discriminated against because they do not have the capacity to access these other services. So we should be cognizant of that, because we have older folks who fall into it. We have younger folks who fall into it, people all across the political spectrum, as well as people who are all different types of people in this country. And they deserve to be able to have access to vote without these types of restrictions. But honestly, it's going to take people in powerful positions who hold that view and getting them elected.
Yeah, I agree. You know, at the end of the day, it's like this. If these people that are currently in office do not care enough to make sure that everyone have equal access to voting rights, and if they don't care enough, it's sad to say that there's really nothing that citizens can do, because you can't call your legislators and they're going to listen to you. They don't listen. They don't even return phone calls. They don't return emails. If you do get a return email, it's a canned email, and it's not even addressing the issue of your concern. You're not going to get a letter written back to you. So the best thing that you could do is simply continue to raise awareness about who these legislators are and work to vote them out of office. Because if you think about it, at the turn of every American crisis, Republican legislators have consistently turned their back on the people. With the HEROES Act, with the CARES Act, with the American Recovery Act, with the American Relief Act, Republicans consistently turn their back. So I would, under like a government where all of the politicians cared about their constituents, I would say call your legislators, call your county commissioners, call your supervisor of elections, and even sometimes they're conflicted with party politics. That's what you would normally do. But in the state of Florida, you can call them all day long and it won't be any good. So the best thing to do is vote to get them out of office.
And I'd just like to close out with both of you giving some final thoughts, just brief final thoughts on voter suppression and how you'd like to work to support the people. Can we hear from you first, Dr. Vanier?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for moderating this session for us here today. And thank you so much to Alan Ellison for having me here. This has been such an enriching conversation. I will apologize to all the people who are not super Politico junkies, who we really got into the weeds on this, but I think it's important that we say this. And if you get people like Alan and I who are out here, we're passionate about it, we know what we're talking about, and we're not afraid to bring that out to the people, then we're all going to be better for it. Because I know this stuff can get kind of boring and dry. But when you're excited about it like we are, and we're ready to tell you what we're going to do to make it better, I think that makes it a little bit easier to get through these kind of conversations. And that's why I think it's important that we have them here too. So, everybody in the United States, every citizen deserves to have their voice heard. They deserve to be able to be part of our society, and they deserve to be able to have a place to pursue their goals, to have a true quality of life. And that's what candidates like Alan and I are fighting for. And it is about who we are, and it is about our communities, and it is about our state and all the people who are in it, not just the select few, not just the wealthy, not just our donors, everyone. And that's what it means to be here, to be representative of Americans, that we're going to fight for these type of access for you, that we're going to call out voter suppression, especially the kind of ham-handed stuff they do here in the state of Florida. It's unbelievable sometimes. And the fact that the vast majority of these folks trying to pull these things over, pull these things off, will just look you straight in the eye and tell you everything is fine. This isn't voter suppression, they'll tell you. This is just keeping costs down. It's fiscal conservative. Okay, that's what it is 99% of the time. And I'm really tired of that trope as well. And in fact, we already heard, we didn't talk about this, but some of those voter suppression laws that they're trying to pass here in the state of Florida, supervisors of elections, both Democrats and Republicans, are very upset about it because we have one of the best voting election systems in the country, especially when it comes to remote voting. So why would we change it? There is no rationale. It's purely politics, and it's gross partisan politics. It has nothing to do with helping people, has nothing to do with making things better. It's just an opportunity that the Republicans see because the oversight has lapsed and they know they can knock off a few votes. But those votes are your friends and family and mine, and I'm not going to tolerate it. And so I really hope that you're going to continue to stand with us, continue to support myself and Alan and all the candidates out there who are really working for the people. I would love to have your support. I know we're in the chat here getting volunteers and stuff, and I'm hoping that you'll come with and help support my campaign too. You can get to my website right here. We are spinning up for our 2022 run, and we would love to have your support. Cash is also nice too, so the Act Blue is in the box. Definitely get that. I'm not going to use your line, Em. I'm going to let you use it. But, you know, that kind of stuff keeps us grassroots candidates going because I take 0.0 corporate dollars. So if you really want to send somebody to Washington, D.C. that's going to fight for the people, that's not going to be in the pocket of big ag, big sugar, and the mining companies, and the banking companies, and the health insurance companies, big pharma, and all these big polluters, then you're going to need to help us by giving a little bit of cash to get us along the way. So thanks again for having me here. I really appreciated it, and we're going to keep fighting.
And do you have some closing thoughts for us, Mr. Ellison?
Absolutely. Yeah. Before I go into my closing thoughts, I do want to address gun violence. I think it's necessary that we do that right now. In 2019, there were 40,000 Americans that were shot to just senseless gun violence in America. Okay. In the last 7 days, there have been 7 mass shootings claiming 39 lives. And we want to know that there are leaders out there that are working towards common sense gun legislation. We also want to let the families of those victims know that we are with you. We hear you. We are. I couldn't even sleep last night. I was up all night hurting for the families that have lost these loved ones. You know, we have coronavirus. Over 30,000 Floridians have died in a year because of COVID-19. So there are families that are hurting tonight. There are families that are not going to be able to see their loved ones tomorrow because of the gun violence. And here's the thing, and I said this earlier, at the turn of every crisis, it has been progressives, the Democrats that have been there trying to push for legislation that improves the quality of life for every American. The Republicans have been there to turn their back, and they're turning their back right now on something that we need, and that is common sense gun legislation. We must have campaign finance reform. We must have voting right protections. We must have common sense gun legislations that have like universal background checks along with mental health screening so that these individuals do not get access to weapons of mass destruction. We have to protect our society. We have to protect one another. Our campaign is about improving the quality of life for everyone. And that is very comprehensive because there are literally 55,000 different issues that affect millions of people. And if you want to help us, if you want to be a part of this movement to affect positive change, then I invite you to join our campaign. Join Dr. Banier's campaign, AlanEllison.com. Get involved. We want to inspire, educate, and mobilize you to be able to make the changes that are necessary for your family, for your community. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure that you're protected. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure that our environment is safe and clean, as well as your children will have a beautiful world to live in when they come of age. That's what it's all about. You know, we're everyday people trying to make impact in a world where there are people that do not care about you, that are literally making decisions that affect your life every single day. And if you know, like I know, most of the times you're not getting any real benefit from having those individuals. I'm running against Marco Rubio. He's been in office for 11 years, and in 11 years, he has missed 60% of work. How many of you at home can work on your jobs 40% of the time and still keep your job? I'm asking that you join our campaign to help remove Marco Rubio. We need your support. We need your dollars. Your dollars help us to reach further, and we can't do it without you. This is truly a partnership. This is an agency whereby we are looking to represent your interests. The reason we're holding this town hall on voter suppression is to raise the awareness on the issues that people are constantly being disenfranchised by, and that is voter suppression tactics. We want to make sure that each and every one of our voters have the opportunity to express themselves and to have the representation that will work for their interests. There are so many issues at stake, but we're here working to try to make sure that you have the perfect representation for those issues. And again, please join our teams, join our campaigns. Let's be a part of progress, and let's continue to unite Florida. We can't do this without you. We need your support. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight in this town hall. And I look forward to having more discussions with you on other issues in the coming months. Thank you.
Well, again, we'd like to thank everyone for being here and for coming out tonight. Our town halls are hosted on the fourth Tuesday of every month. We will have another. We also have Fridays for Florida every week. But until next time, we really appreciate you guys coming out. Thank you to everyone involved, and we will see you guys again soon.